Welcome to Revive at Home. I want to talk to you for a little while today about the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ and how it affects our lives and how it's a picture for some things that go on in our lives too. We've just had Easter when we celebrate and remember the victory of the death and resurrection of Christ. And we're super familiar, aren't we, with the story of the cross, the flogging, the being nailed to the cross. We think of films like The Passion, and of course every Jesus film there's ever been has shown us that picture of Jesus on the cross and him dying and then him being put in the tomb and rising again. And all that story we're super familiar with. But I was listening to Revelation chapter 5 on one of my audio Bible books the other day. And it just reminded me again of there's more than one perspective, more than one way to look at the story of the death and resurrection of Christ. Revelation chapter 5 is the picture, the place where we see that moment in time, but from heaven's perspective. So I want to read a portion of Revelation 5 to you right now. So buckle in and get ready for some scripture. But think of this as I read. We are looking at the moment of the death and resurrection of Christ, but not from an earthly perspective. We're not looking at it in this passage from being Mary at the foot of the cross or the centurion at the foot of the cross. We're looking at this from heaven's perspective. How did God the Father and hosts of angels see what was going on? Let's read Revelation chapter 5, and I'm reading from the Passion Translation to give it a fresh twist for us today. It says this in Revelation 5, beginning at verse 1. And I saw the one seated on the throne was holding in his right hand an unopened scroll with writing on the inside and on the outside, and it was sealed with 7 seals. Then I saw an incredibly powerful angel proclaiming with a great loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its 7 seals?" But no person could be found, living or dead, in all of creation. No one was worthy to open the scroll and read its contents. So I broke down weeping with intense sorrow, because there was found no one worthy to break open the scroll and read its contents. Then one of the elders said to me, "Stop weeping. Look, the mighty Lion of Judah's tribe, the Root of David, he has conquered. He is the worthy one who can open the scroll and its 7 seals." Then I looked and saw a young lamb standing in the middle of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders. He appeared to have been slaughtered or slain, but was now alive. He had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out to the ends of the earth. I saw the young lamb approach the throne and receive the scroll. Let me just jump forward to what they began to sing. It says that they sang a song of praise to the Lamb, because you were slaughtered for us. You were worthy to take the scroll and open its seals. Your blood was the price paid to redeem us. You purchased us to bring us to God out of every tribe and language, people, group and nation. You have chosen us to serve our God. We formed us into a kingdom of priests who reign on the earth. And then the angels worship the Lamb. An incredible picture of this same moment, but from heaven's hill, from heaven's balcony, from heaven's perspective. Here you've got this picture of a scroll that no one is worthy to open. I mean, this reminds me of some scriptures. You find that, no one's righteous, no, not one. That's in the book of Romans, isn't it? But the book of Isaiah has scriptures like this. It says he, that's God, saw that there was no one. He was appalled that there was no one to intervene. So his own arm achieved salvation for him, and his own righteousness sustained him. And then in Isaiah 63 in verse 5, it says, I looked, but there was no one to help. I was appalled that no one gave support. So my own arm achieved salvation for me. It's this picture that there's no one in all of creation righteous enough, clean enough, pure enough, worthy to do the work of salvation, to take on themselves the sin of mankind and put that sin to death, as it were, and make it so that man could be holy and righteous and reconciled to God once again. There was no one. So you have this picture of there's no one that can open this scroll. And the scroll there that no one could open, no one was worthy to unseal, is representative of the next stage of God's plan, the next moment of outworking, the outworking of salvation for humanity. No one could open it. But then the Lion of Judah, God, Jesus, he became a lamb. The Lion found it acceptable to become a meek, slain lamb so that he could be worthy to open the next scroll of God's purposes and lead to the salvation of mankind. Wow. But you know, the Easter story, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, is not only about the work of salvation for us, but there's a sense in which the New Testament talks about us sharing in the sufferings of Christ in order to share in his glory. So for a moment, I want to take this incredible divine picture of there was no one worthy to open the scroll and start the next stage of God's purposes. So Jesus himself, the Lion, became a slain lamb to be worthy so that he could lead mankind into the next stage of God's purposes for us, clean, holy, perfected, righteous, and in union with God. But I want to use that as a picture for our own lives. You know, there are times in our lives when we have to shift from trying to be conquering lion to humbled lamb, to be worthy of the next stage in our life. There are moments when we need to learn to share in the sufferings if we're going to step into the next place of glory in God's purpose for our lives. So can we talk about that for a moment? This incredible picture of the worthy one humbling himself to open the next scroll of destiny is something we need to just meditate on for a moment. How can we be ready for the next stage of our destiny? I think there's another picture that really will help us in the Bible. Sometimes I think just talking about the cross is hard for us to relate to. How do I share in the sufferings when I'm not going to physically get on the cross? How do I open the scroll of the next stage of destiny, be worthy of it and ready to step into God's purposes for my life? I love that scripture. Oh, where is it? Probably 2 Timothy, something like that, where it talks about there's articles of noble and ignoble use. And if we cleanse ourselves of the ignoble sides to who we are, we'll be ready for the better, greater, the golden purposes of God. How do we step into the sense of being worthy and ready for God's next stage of our life? Well, the heavenly perspective of thrones is a bit hard for us to relate to. The cross perspective, because we are not going to, God's not asking for us to be executed in some horrific way. But how do we share in the sufferings of Christ? Well, there's another part of the story that I think will help us. Let's go there. I want to talk about Gethsemane. When we share in the sufferings of Christ so that we can share in his resurrection, when we embrace suffering so that we can experience the next stage of glory that he has for us, it doesn't usually feel like the cross. It doesn't feel like a lamb on a throne. I think the best picture for us in our daily lives to embrace this concept of suffering that leads us to greater glory is Gethsemane. And so let's look at the accounts of Gethsemane. You've got one in Mark chapter 14. Let me read it to you. Gethsemane is the place where Jesus went and prayed just before he was arrested and then led to be flogged and then crucified. Mark 14 verse 32, they went, that's the disciples, to a place called Gethsemane. And Jesus said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. He took Peter, James and John, his favourite three, along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, he said to them. Stay here and keep watch. Going a little further, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible the hour might pass from him. Abba, Father, he said, everything's possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. And that was his moment in Gethsemane. Luke 22 adds a few more words to it as well that I think are useful for us to look at. It says there in Luke 22:39, Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, pray that you'll not fall into temptation. He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him, and being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. Here's this moment in Gethsemane when you could say, in a sense, here's when Jesus, for the final time, had to accept again this was the way that salvation was going to be wrought through his death and resurrection. And he was physically in pain and distress, and in this moment saying, God, everything in him, just like you and I go through stresses and emotions and anxiety and pressure and trauma, everything in him was saying, is there not a better way to do this? And yet here was his worship that made him worthy. Yet not my will, but yours be done, God. He was going through pain. Now, I was looking at some of the deeper meanings of the words for how he was troubled and sorrowful in the original language. And there's words like he was deeply troubled. Do you ever get deeply troubled? Led by God to a place where you find yourself deeply troubled. Don't believe Christians that tell you we should always live as if life is a bed of roses and everything is easy. Living for Christ, you will share in his sufferings and have times when you are deeply troubled and deeply humbled and deeply stressed. He went through distress of soul. One of the words literally means he was thrown into terror or dread as he was moving along to fulfill his purpose in God. Another of the words says that he was troubled, that he was depressed, that he was heavy. The word sorrowful literally means very sad, overcome with sorrow to the point that could cause death. Wow. These were the emotions and the physical and emotional and psychological trauma that he was going through. And as he was trying to follow his Father in obedience, and he found himself in this painful place, he was alone. It said he went beyond his disciples. At first he took the three a certain distance, but then he left them. You know, there are moments when you are alone and in a traumatic situation, and it can be the most worshipful point of suffering you'll ever go through, when you in that moment say, God, I won't cut and run. I will drink the cup that you put before me. And here's the thing, we know from heaven's perspective, by him drinking that cup, he was made worthy to open the scroll. By the lion being willing to be a lamb that said, God, this is stressing me to the point of sweating blood, but I will humble myself and be the lamb when I'm perfectly capable of being the lion. In that humbling moment, he was becoming worthy to open the scroll and work our salvation. Suffering for us won't often look like a cross, even though we use the picture, I take up my cross, I die daily, all those things. Absolutely. Won't often look to us like a lamb on a throne, but I think this is a great picture to us to understand. There are distressing, difficult, humbling, emotionally stressful moments that we will go through in following God, when we feel humbled and actually we want to fight for our rights, when we feel overlooked and we want to fight to be noticed. But God is saying, no, stay quiet, stay humble, fulfill my will for you. And that's what suffering often looks like, but it leads to incredible glory. What's God doing? Well, I read an article by my mum when I was researching this. What does Gethsemane mean? And my mum wrote this, Gethsemane means oil press. Remember, he was on the Mount of Olives. There were olive trees around. And that place where he was all about, in its name, pressing and crushing the olive ready for use. Let me read it to you. It was the place where olives were crushed and made into olive oil. Now, olives are potentially extremely useful, but in their raw state, they have limited use, my mum writes. Never walk into an olive grove, pluck an olive from the tree and eat it. They're inedible. They must first be processed, usually more than once, to draw the bitterness from them. Or they must be pressed to obtain olive oil, which is then so valuable and useful. In the Mediterranean, it's thought of as liquid gold. To reach their potential, olives must be crushed and pressed. You could say persecuted and suffer. For Jesus to reach his full potential, to redeem mankind, he suffered, was persecuted and hard pressed. His Gethsemane experience was just a part of this process. Wow. My mum goes on to talk about a moment in our lives when we were homeless and going through a difficult situation, and my parents were praying about it as we were missionaries in a foreign field. And she said that as they prayed, God revealed it to us that we were being beaten for the light. In other words, we were going through a Gethsemane, a cross, a lamb on the throne suffering moment to be worthy to open the scroll for the next stage of life. I think there are some people that refuse to suffer and go through difficulty. And I believe we can get stuck at the door of a new day because we'll never be humble enough to accept God's sufferings and to participate in the sufferings so that we can enjoy the resurrections of God. There are going to be moments when we suffer and go through pain. Doesn't mean that everything comes our way is a suffering from God. You need some discernment on that. But there are going to be moments when we're humbled, and it's so that God can get us ready for the next stage of glory in our lives. A Gethsemane, a crushing moment in life, but when God is actually processing us for promotion and for purpose. Let's learn to identify our suffering moments. Let me just tell you a couple of stories of what this feels like and has felt like in my life. And let's see if I can help you identify suffering moments in your life that are getting you ready for promotion and glory. For centuries, Christian leaders have understood that life seems to go through process cycles. As we shift from glory to glory, it's almost that between each stage of glory, there is a suffering or a valley of the shadow of death or a dark night of the soul, some would say. Think of it through the pages of the Bible. You've got Joseph with his pit and his prison, but they were earning incredible new promotions and glory in God. Think of Daniel in the lion's den, but the promotion it brought. Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego in that fiery furnace, but the promotion it brought. There is a suffering that almost seems to earn a promotion and a new level of glory, or cleanse us ready for it. It could be either, or it could be both, couldn't it? There's a work that God does in us to prepare us. Before Joshua went into the promised land, God said, circumcise all the men. Trust me, that was a dark night of the soul. God will come and cleanse, ready for the next promotion. He does it again and again. And so for centuries, theologians and Christian leaders have noted the cycle of cleansing and promotion, and cleansing and promotion, and humbling and promotion. It's how God works. I remember a story about the great Catherine Coleman. And she says in her autobiography, she would say, I know the day I died. And there was a moment of family crisis where she decided she had to give everything to God still. And she would say publicly, I died that day. It was a Gethsemane. It was a cross moment. It was I could be a lion, but I'm going to humble myself and be a lamb on the throne, ready to step into all that God's got for me. My parents, again, I remember vividly the moment as a child when we sold everything we had and put everything we owned into a Citroen 2CV6, everything we had in the world at that time, and we headed off into Europe on the mission field. But as we drove off, leaving behind the house that my parents had owned and the good job that my dad had had and the great church that we were in, the sound I remember as a 7-year-old was my mum's sobbing as we left. That's what the call of God sounds like sometimes. Sobbing with suffering as God's lining you up for blessing and promotion. And boy, were my parents blessed and promoted through their Gethsemane moments in God. What Gethsemanes are you facing? Maybe you faced one recently. It's just going to help you understand more what God had been doing. Or maybe you're going through something right now, or maybe you're about to go through something. This isn't the difficulty of pain coming into our lives because of our own sin or our own stupidity, or it's not even the same thing as the devil attacking. We need to fight those moments, but there is definitely moments we need to identify when it's no, God has me going through this narrow, humble way. Remember, it's a narrow path. It's a low, narrow door in order to step into all that God has for you. What's your Gethsemane? What is he putting to death in you right now? Cleansing you and preparing you for a greater place in the future. Where does he want you to just, don't be a lion all the time. Be a lamb and just cooperate with me in God. Drink the cup of difficulty so that I can feed you with the feast of glory. Let's identify our Gethsemanes and then worshipfully say, God, I wish it was another way. I want life to be a bed of roses. I really, really do. But God, I will drink this cup of humbling and delay and suffering in order to step into everything you have for me. Discuss, pray, see if you can tear apart. It's really hard to do big themes like this in just 20 minutes, but see if you can tear apart some of the things that I've been saying and discover what it's truly like as a Christian to share in God's suffering, that we may also share in his glory. God bless you.